Dr. Cisse covering anatomy and physiology. Today I will talk about the chambers of the heart. Okay, the chambers of the heart. So the heart, I'm going to draw the heart here. The heart. So I'm going to tilt this one to the left a little bit. That's going to be the apex of the heart and the base of the heart. The heart has a specific function, which is to pump blood. In order for the heart to pump blood, it has to have a space for it. Those spaces are called chambers. The heart has 4 chambers. It has 2 atria and 2 ventricles. Okay? So because this one is going to be tilted on this side, there's a little piece called the apex. It tells me this is the left side of the heart and this is the right side of the heart. We have 2 atria and 2 ventricles. Now, the 2 atria are separated by a wall called interatrial septum. Between atria, septum. The septum is just a wall. So here I have the right atrium, I'll have the left atrium, and this wall is called the interatrial septum. The 2 ventricles are also separated by a wall. This wall is called interventricular septum. Between the atria and the ventricle, we have also valves. And those valves are called atrioventricular valve. Atrioventricular valve, both of them. Now, between the 2 atria and the ventricle, so I'm going to make some kind of neck here. There's a little neck that separates them, like a little sinus, called the coronary sinus. Coronary sinus, like a crown, coronary sinus. And the coronary vein or coronary arteries are just the veins and arteries that serve the heart itself. They don't pump blood to any other place, okay? So I have the right atrium, the left atrium. And also, look at that, the right ventricle and the left ventricle. Now, between the right and left ventricle, I have a valve, and this valve on the right side has 3 little openings, like 3 little flaps. We call them the tricuspid valve. This one on the right side is called the tricuspid valve. Okay? On the other side, on the left, between the atrium and the ventricle, I have the mitral valve. Mitral valve. Okay? That's going to be the atrioventricular valves between the right and right atrium and right ventricle, and left atrium and left ventricle. What is inside the atrium? First, what is the job of the atrium? The atrium, the word atrium actually means the doorstep, right? Like the vestibule, the doorstep. So the atria are the one that receive blood. The right atrium receives blood from the body, and the left atrium receives blood from the lungs. So both of them receive blood to give to the ventricle. So what do we have on the right atrium? On the right atrium, we have the superior vena cava, the inferior vena cava. Also, we have an opening of the coronary sinus between the tricuspid valve here and the inferior vena cava. Right here, we have a little hole here where the blood from the heart itself drains, like from the vein, drain into the right ventricle. Also, we have bumps, like ridges, inside the atrium. So because it's not smooth inside, okay? Now, if you look at this, you can tell right away that in order for the heart to work, it has to kind of squeeze. We're going to talk about that, but it kind of makes sense to see where the valves are going to and what is holding them. That's why between the valve and the floor of the atrium, you're going to find a lot of muscles kind of holding some kind of cord, some kind of collagen cord holding the valve to the floor. You will see when the heart is pumping, it's going to have to pull on those cords so that the heart can pump blood. Between the right atrium and the left atrium, during embryonic development, when the fetus is developing, there is a space between the right and left atria. That space closes after birth and is create an oval opening called the foramen ovale. Foramen ovale. Ovalis. The foramen ovalis is like a space, right? It's like a hole that used to be there that got closed. So now we have a point, something that looks like a hole in there. Also in the right atrium, we have the pacemakers. We have the SA and the AV nodes. Now those nodes are like a breaker in the house, like electrical breaker. They're called the pacemaker. They determine, for example, the beginning of the work of the heart. When the heart has to pump blood, it has to push, they start with those pacemakers. The first one is called SA, and the other one is, second one is called AV. SA means sinoatrial node. Why it's called sino? Because it's next to the sinus. Remember to talk about the sinus? Atrial in the atrium. And the AV node is atrial ventricular node because it's next to the ventricle. Like AV is going to be at the door here. So we have two nodes, SA nodes, AV nodes, and the two are called the pacemakers of the heart. So the atrium, the right atrium, will have the foramen ovale during during development, right? But it become the fossa because it kind of closes, it doesn't open anymore. It becomes the fossa ovalis. So it used to be a foramen. When it closes, it becomes the fossa. So fossa ovalis. Fossa just means like a hole that you cannot go through. Or foramen, you could go through it. Okay. Now, when the blood needs to go from the right atrium to the right ventricle, it has to go through a door, and this door is the valve. And this valve on the right side is called the tricuspid valve. The tricuspid valve here is attached to the floor by tendon, like some kind of rope cord. Tendon is cord, just like a rope, so they can be attached to the floor of the ventricle through pieces of muscle projecting up called the papillae. So this papillae kind of holds the tendinous cord through the tricuspid valve so they can control the opening of the valve. So when the valve open, it can hold it down before it closes. What about the left atrium? The left atrium also receives blood, but it receives blood from the lung. That is why, since blood is coming, it has to come through veins. Remember, veins bring back blood and artery takes them away. So when the veins have to receive blood, they receive it from the lung. So I put that in red here because they're gonna be the pulmonary vein. The right pulmonary vein, because this right atrium is gonna be on the back side. There's gonna be another one here. So from the two lungs, so the left pulmonary vein and the right pulmonary vein will receive blood from the lungs, okay? From the lungs, okay? So the pulmonary valve will be attached to the right atrium. And just like the left atrium, just like the right atrium, it has also a valve connecting it to the left ventricle. And that one is called the mitral valve. People used to call it a bicuspid, but it's called the mitral valve, the mitral valve. So the mitral valve connected the left atrium to the left ventricle, and the tricuspid valve control the right atrium to the right ventricle. Both valves will have tendinous cordae, trabeculae to kind of hold it down to the floor, just like this one, to the floor of the ventricle. What about inside the left ventricle? The left ventricle is bigger, is tougher, is stronger than the right ventricle. Why? Because it will pump blood to the whole body compared to the right ventricle that will pump blood only to the lungs. That is why here, after the blood comes here, it will go out through the pulmonary trunk to the pulmonary artery to go get oxygen in the lung. So this pulmonary trunk will also have a valve, and this valve is called the semilunar valve. The semilunar valve. The same thing happens in the left ventricle. When the left ventricle has to pump blood to the whole body through the aorta, that aorta will also have a semilunar valve here. So both the pulmonary trunk and the aorta will have semilunar valve. Both between the right atrium and right ventricle, left atrium and left ventricle, we're gonna have atrioventricular valve, tricuspid, bicuspid here. So in the left ventricle, very interesting because this left ventricle has to push blood through the whole body. The muscle will be stronger. It'll be like a circle, like a little ball holding blood. It will be like, when you look at the picture like a transverse cut, you're gonna be like something, if the whole heart is transverse cut like this, the left ventricle will look like a circle like this, a very strong circle, right? Like this. And the right ventricle will look like that. So the left ventricle actually helps the right ventricle push blood because it doesn't have to push blood a lot to any kind of it doesn't have to push it strongly. So if you look at the left ventricle here, you will see that even the trabeculae or the papillary, they're gonna be stronger and tougher because they're gonna have to push blood to the whole body. To conclude, we can kind of look at the picture and see that the right atrium, inferior vena cava, superior vena cava, the opening of the coronary sinus here, the tricuspid valve coming down, the tendinous chordae or chordine tendinous, and the papillae, and the semilunar valve of the pulmonary trunk going to the pulmonary artery. Then on the left atrium, we can see the right and left, right, pulmonary vein, because they kind of bring the blood from the heart, it's gonna be vein, and then coming down to the mitral valve to the left ventricle, going out through the aorta, he has to push through the semilunar valve of the aorta. There will be like an ascending branch of the aorta, right, the aortic arch, and then the descending is gonna go later on. But this valve, these two valves are gonna be the lunar valve. So we have right atrium, left atrium, right ventricle, left ventricle, right? So, and then don't forget about the SA node and the AV node inside the right ventricle. They're gonna be the pacemakers of the heart. We're gonna talk about them in the next video to explain what they do for the heart, okay? Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in class.